What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Fairweather Fan Podcast. My name is Anthony, and today I have a broad range of topics that I want to go over, starting with the Philadelphia Phillies. They just swept the Atlanta Braves. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I like and what I don't like about the Phillies. I'm going to talk about the 76ers, and what my thoughts are with Embiid. He's going to be out again tonight. What I think about him, what I think about George Hill, and the timeline for his return. I'm going to talk a little bit about NASCAR and what they're doing with rain tires at Martinsville. And then at the end, even though I said I wasn't going to dive too much into social issues, this is a pretty big thing in sports right now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the All-Star Game being moved from Atlanta. I put all the times in the description, so if you want to skip over anything, you can. But I'm going to be giving my take on the MLB moving their the All-Star Game out of Atlanta. But first of all, let's talk about the Philadelphia Phillies. Are the Phillies good? That's the question I want to ask. I was going to ask originally, are the Phillies a playoff team? And I like to have a question that I start off with instead of just a topic. So, like, I ask myself this question in these podcasts, and I was originally going to put down, are the Phillies a playoff team? But I don't want to dive too much into the playoffs yet because, A, we're only 3 games into the season, and B, one of the other contenders for that wild card spot that I've been talking about, that 5th wild card spot, hasn't played a game yet. So, and their first series is against us. So, I want to save the playoff talk until we at least get through this next series versus the Mets. And then next week we play both the Braves and the Mets again. It's a really stupid start to the season for the Phillies because they have to play basically the 2 other best teams in the division. But I thought they had a really good opening series, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about what I like about the Phillies first, and then I'm going to talk a bit about what I don't like. And what I like is, and this is pretty obvious, pitching. Pitching is a thing that has been just absolutely top-notch for the Phillies. Nola went 6 2/3, gave up 2 runs, was 1 strike away from pitching 7 shutout innings. Wheeler, I don't even need to talk about Wheeler. I mean, he had a 1-hitter yesterday through 7 innings and 10 strikeouts. And then today, Zach Eflin also went 7 innings and only gave up, again, just like Nola, only gave up that 1 run in the 7th inning. So, with 2 outs as well. So, the Phillies have only given up 3 runs to one of the greatest offensive teams in baseball right now. That's a pretty impressive feat. And, there was a lot of talk before the season about these 3 guys are going to be huge this season. They're really good. If they're going to make the playoffs, it's going to be on the backs of Eflin, Nola, and Wheeler. And those 3 guys have really stepped up in this opening series. I was a little bit worried in spring training that that there would be a problem perhaps with Nola or Wheeler because those were the guys that were giving up a ton of runs in spring training. But they've been just phenomenal to start the season. And then in the bullpen, they have really barely struggled out there as well. I mean, the first game of the season, Alvarado struggled a little bit with his control. And then maybe a little bit with Hector Neris this last game, but I think that's also probably because we were just a little bit worried that, the Braves were within 1 run, so it might go to extra innings. There was a guy on second, but overall, the bullpen has been pretty good. And, the other thing with Neris is he's pitched both of the other games to start the season. So he's pitched in all 3 games. Got the save today. So definitely a good job on his behalf. I think maybe a little fatigue was setting in. Hopefully they won't have to go to him tomorrow. But I guess we'll see. I don't think they will go to him tomorrow either way. But it's just been a great job all around from the bullpen and the starters. And then the other thing on the offensive side, hitting really hasn't been too much of a problem either. And that's one of the things that I don't like about the Phillies that I'm going to talk about in a second has to do with hitting. But overall, the Phillies have been pretty good at getting hits. I mean, the first game of the season, they had 9 hits. The second game, they had 8 hits, and then today's game, they also had 8 hits in the 2-1 win over the Braves today. Um, you know, Knapp is Well, Knapp, this is his first game. He's batting 667. He's 2 for 3. Harper's batting 300. Gregorius is batting 273. Segura's been all right. He didn't have a hit today though, but he's been pretty good in the first 2 games. JT Realmuto is proving his worth. He's hitting 444. Even Adam Hazley is hitting 400. So all around hitting has been pretty good. With the only exceptions I would say being McCutchen. And then a little bit of Bohm, but he had a pretty good game today. It was just the first 2 games he struggled. But overall, hitting has been really good. Getting on base has been good. The thing that I don't like about the Phillies is that while the hitting has been good, the run scoring has not been good at all. They left 15 guys on base today. They left 20 on base in the opening day game, and I didn't watch the game yesterday because I had to work. But in the second game of the season, they left 14 guys on base. So you can't be doing that. What is that total? 15, 20, that's 35. That's 49 runners left on base in the first 3 games. Even if you only convert a third of those runs, let's say, what would that be? Around 16 runs that they would have converted. Additionally, you split that out over 3 games. That's, then you win the first game. Well, let's just say, 16 runs, so let's just round that down to 15. You score 5 extra runs a game, you're blowing the Braves out of the water. That first game would have been 8-2. The second, well, technically they wouldn't have scored that extra inning run, so it would have been 7-2. The second game would have been 9-0. Which, I know we don't want to talk about that score right now as Flyers fans as well, but, 9-0, that would have been a huge win. Today's game would have been 7-1. Like, they would be blowing the Braves out of the water if they had just scored those runs. And the Braves left a lot of guys on base too, but that's also partially because of our pitching. But what they need to do is they need to string together hits instead of just, getting some hits and then leaving guys on base. I feel like hitting throughout the order needs to be better, or we need to, kind of readjust that start of the lineup. Maybe not for the Mets series. We should definitely see how this lineup works going forward. But then after that, they should start stacking some of the top guys at the top of the order, and seeing how it goes from there. And then just hoping the guys at the bottom of the order start hitting as well. But the bad thing about this is that things could really fall apart pretty quickly if the confidence of the players goes down if they keep getting left on base, and then all of a sudden everybody's just swinging for the fences because they think if I get on I'm not going to score. The run support definitely needs to be better. They should be scoring more than 9 runs in a series. And granted, the Braves pitching is by default good. With any team that's a contender for the World Series, which the Braves are, pitching is automatically expected to be good for that team. I guess we'll see how they perform against the Mets. They've got to go against DeGrom and Stroman. We'll see how they hit against them. I think that first game with DeGrom is going to be a tough one to win. I think the second one is, I don't know how Stroman's going to do. I think that's also going to be kind of a tough game. The third one, Nola's going to be on the mound. That's already been confirmed. So I guess we'll see how they perform in this series against the Mets. But overall, just to start the season, it's been a great opening weekend. And I hope more than anything that the Phillies can continue this production pitching-wise, and they can ramp up their production offensively. But anyway, let's move on to basketball now. The 76ers. Is there a reason for Sixers fans to be concerned right now? And thinking about last night when they won against the Minnesota Timberwolves, you would think, why am I asking this question? Well, Embiid is going to be out again tonight. In that game, I don't know what time this podcast is going to be uploading at, but that game starts at 7 o'clock tonight. But is there a reason for Sixers fans to be concerned with Embiid being out, and then with George Hill? He's still out. And I've been saying that the Sixers won't get the first seed for a while now. I've always said it's inevitable that Brooklyn is eventually going to take over that spot. But now, I'm even more concerned that that's going to become a reality. And, there was a little bit of time there, when they were up 2 games on Brooklyn, when I thought, hey, maybe if they get through the rest of this road trip, and they only lose 1 game, they might be fine overall. I mean, I don't think, holy crap, Brooklyn actually lost. I can't believe, I'm literally just finding that out now. They lost to the Bulls, 115-107. So the Sixers are up by a game. Kyrie played in that game. LaMarcus Aldridge played in that game. Blake Griffin played. It's just Harden and KD are still out. I can't believe they lost. Oh, DeAndre Jordan also didn't play. Also the loss. I mean, injuries are part of the sport, and if Brooklyn can't get healthy, it might wind up costing them. But I think that, even with the loss today, I mean, it's a long season, so, I think that the Nets, because of our just crappy schedule, the Nets are eventually going to take over first place in the East. I hope that the Sixers beat the Nets. I think they play them this week. Let me just make sure of that. Yeah, they play them actually in a couple weeks on the 14th. They're 1-1 against the Nets this season. So, I hope that the Sixers win that game, but they also have to play all those West Coast teams again, but this time at home, and they have to play them right in a row, and I guess we're still lucky that LeBron should be out for those games, and I don't know about Anthony Davis. He'll probably be out for those games as well. I guess we'll see. But, what they're going to need to get that first seed, and Daryl Morey, his philosophy is the Sixers need to get the first seed. And you can just tell by his Twitter, he really wants the Sixers to get that first seed. And everybody does. But, with the Nets, they're not as concentrated on getting that first seed as they are getting through the playoffs. And, that's partially because, or that's mostly because, their team is injured to hell and back. But, the Sixers, what they need is they need everybody to have all hands on deck for these next few, important games. Just take a look at their upcoming schedule. After tonight, they play the Celtics, and then they play the Pelicans a few nights later, and then that's part of a back-to-back where they play the Thunder. That's also on the road. It's part of this 4-game road trip. Yes, they have them going back out on the road for another road trip because it's the NBA and they hate us. So they play the Celtics. They have 2 nights off, and then they play the Pelicans next Friday, and then the Thunder next Saturday. On Monday, they play the Mavericks, and then they come back home, and that's the Nets game. And then after the Nets, they play the Clippers. And after the Clippers, they play the Warriors, who are probably going to have Steph back. And then the Suns. And then they have to go play the Bucks for 2 games in a row. And then they come back home, and they play the Thunder and the Hawks. Those are a few nice games. I think, actually, the rest of the season is light. But, that stretch of having to... First of all, go on a 4-game road trip and then come back home and play 6 games against championship contenders in a row. It's ridiculous. And so they're going to need everybody to be a part of that. And Embiid's out tonight, which makes sense, kind of. I mean, I know they want to, make sure that he completely heals, and they had a minute count on him yesterday. But I expect him to be back for that start of the road trip against the Celtics. But George Hill is who I'm mainly concerned about, because this move is looking kind of a little bit dumb at this point, that the Sixers made this deal. And I know that Tony Bradley wasn't going to get that many minutes, but with Embiid being out again tonight, Dwight Howard and Mike Scott are the only two natural centers again. They don't have Tony Bradley still. And so first of all, they definitely need to pick up another center. I think that, if you're going to rest Embiid at any point again this season, you definitely need to have another center. Unless you plan on just keeping Ben Simmons down there. Because Ben Simmons has basically been the center when Mike Scott and Dwight Howard haven't been, while Embiid has been out. But George Hill, what is the problem with George Hill? Because we were initially told that he was going to be back either when Embiid was back at the same time, or earlier. We had gotten the impression earlier this week and earlier last week after the trade deadline that he was going to be back for perhaps that game against Cleveland, perhaps the first home game after that road trip ended. But, at some point this weekend. We initially got the impression that he was going to be back this weekend. Now, apparently, there's no timetable for his return. So, what that tells me is he's going to be out for at least another week. Which is a problem, because it's a tough week coming up. With this road trip. And you would really... you would want him to be back for this road trip. Especially if, with these back-to-backs, Embiid doesn't play one of them. Because essentially the Sixers are trying to load manage the guy now. Which, whether or not I agree with that or not is a whole different discussion. But, the stuff earlier in the season about back tightness, I think that was definitely true. But I think that's also, they're trying to load manage him. So... with the Sixers game, they play in the back-to-backs. They play the Pelicans first. I think Embiid will play in that game. I don't know if he'll play in that Saturday game against the Thunder. And so if, Ben Simmons winds up having to back up Mike Scott and Dwight Howard again at center, you would hope that George Hill would be on the floor with him. But we don't know if George Hill's going to be back at that point. Is he even going to travel with the team to on that road trip down to the South? They need him back. And I don't know, this move is looking kind of dumb at this point. And it's just because, Embiid and Hill are both going to be out again. And so they're short-staffed. And they've been short-staffed for all of, since March 12th, basically. With the exception of, the last game last night that Embiid was back. They've been really short-staffed. And even last night, Embiid was on minute restriction, so they were still kind of short-staffed. And I thought the whole idea to beat Brooklyn, to get to the finals, was to have some sort of advantage over them. And I thought that advantage was getting the first seed. But if George Hill isn't coming back, and... how many games are left? Well, the season ends on March 16th, or on May 16th, which is a month and a half away. And so, let me count the amount of weeks that is. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Exactly 6 weeks. And if George Hill's going to be out for one of them, that's pretty big. With 6 weeks left, that's a sixth of the season that's still remaining. The playoffs are coming up pretty quickly. May 16th, that's not that far out, if you think about it. Because basically, the Sixers have this 4-game road trip. Then they have that it's actually a 4-game homestand. And then the Bucks series. And then at that point, we're in late April. And they play the Thunder. They play 2 games against the Hawks, the Spurs, the Bulls. That's part of another short road trip. They play the Spurs, Bulls, and Rockets. They have a 2-game homestand. 2 games in Indiana and then Miami, and then a 2-game homestand against Orlando. And then the season's over at that point. So they've played, let's see, 34 and 15. That's 49 games out of a 72 game season. You've got 23 games left this season. And if he's going to be missing 4 of them or 5 of them, that's pretty huge. And so I'm concerned that he's not going to be back in time to help this team get the first seed. But I just hope that Embiid stays healthy and that we can maybe function without him until he comes back. But I get the impression he's not going to be back until after the road trip. So I guess we'll see. But I'm as a Sixers fan, I'm starting to get a little frustrated. Anyways, let's move on now to NASCAR. They're testing rain tires at Martinsville. Is this a good idea? The answer is very basic, and everybody probably agrees with me. Yes, obviously this is a good idea for NASCAR to test rain tires at Martinsville, because I personally wish they could have rain tires at every track if that would work. And I think this is a product of that Bristol race when they were trying those different tires, and so they had guys going out to Martinsville and basically testing these new rain tires that they got, that I think they might have had on standby for the Bristol race or something. They're basically testing it to see if everything is good. First of all, they need to get rid of these mid-afternoon races, because it's more likely that a race is going to be rained out in the middle of an afternoon, and a lot of the tracks that they race at, because they race a lot in the Midwest and towards the east, on the East Coast, where mid-afternoon thunderstorms are pretty common, like Pocono. It rains probably at least, well, I can't say for sure because I don't live out by Pocono, but, whenever it rains or storms at Pocono, it's in the middle of the day. And I know that because usually the rain comes east and it winds up in New Jersey, where I live, at about 5, 6, 7 o'clock. But it's out at Pocono at like 3, 4 o'clock. And so if they can find a way to get rain tires at Martinsville, hopefully in the future they can get them for other tracks like Pocono. Make sure, let's look at some of these courses and see if it'll work. I think it'll work at Pocono. There's no really heavy turns. It'll probably work at the Brickyard, but that's going to be a road course this year anyway for some stupid reason. The other thing that NASCAR needs to get rid of are Monday afternoon races, because these suck and nobody can watch them. I see a lot of people, argue with others that are complaining that they can't watch this, and, like, it makes no sense to me. Because people that argue with, most people are home and they can watch it, it's like, no, most people aren't really home. A lot of people have work. Like, people that argue with these Monday afternoon races, people that argue in defense of them being a good thing are the ones that don't have jobs or don't have school. Usually they start them at like 3 o'clock or so, or 2 o'clock. Like that's a prime time for classes. And a lot of students have classes in the afternoon because, college students, I'm talking about this from a college perspective. Usually what college students do is get those afternoon classes so we don't have to do morning classes. I like morning classes, but a lot of other college kids will pick all afternoon classes if they can. Sleep in a little bit, it's a commodity to have afternoon classes. And so starting races at 2 o'clock when most people are in class from 110 to 240 or 250 to 420, that's just not a good business thing. And then most people work 9 to 5 or 8 to 4. And then kids are in school until, I don't know what's going on. I mean, I guess it's kind of like specific to region anymore in terms of, high school and middle school and elementary school. But I hope that they just start getting these start times in earlier on Sundays, so that way they don't have to race on Monday. And if they do race on Monday, race in the damn afternoon when people can watch it. I mean, come on. It's not that difficult. And people have been complaining about this for years. Read your Twitter comments, NASCAR. I mean, people are right. Start these races earlier. You know, even if you have to shorten them by a little bit. You know, maybe the Coca-Cola 600 is now the Coca-Cola 500. Who cares? Okay? Like, compared to the other, I know why they do it. They want to do it because they want to compare it to Monaco and the Indy 500, which usually happen on the same weekend. But the Coca-Cola 600 doesn't even compare to those races. So move that to a 500-mile race. Move some of these other ones down a little bit. I mean, I'm not a fan of speeding up sports or anything, but like, you know, with races that there might be rain, just like announce beforehand that you're gonna shoot them, or like shorten them. I mean, like announce beforehand that you're going to make these races shorter. You can do that, you know, and people won't complain that much because at least you'll get the race in on time, and it's a lot less anticlimactic than actually getting it rained out. Invest in a meteorologist and stop doing these Monday start times. Anyway, let's move on to this big topic about the MLB moving their All-Star Game away from Atlanta. I have kind of a two-sided answer with this one. And just ignore that sticker in the background over there because right up there. People listening on Spotify can't see it, but it's a Biden-Harris sticker. I'm pretty moderate. I'm pretty reasonable, I like to think. You know, I don't completely support everything that the politicians I like do. I know that's the case with a lot of people. They like latch on to a politician and follow everything they say. Um, and so a lot of the talk now is like this is a two-sided issue. You either agree with it or you don't. And so I'm going to give a two-sided answer, even though there are multiple different things at play here. Legislation, first of all, if you don't care too much about the United States government, you realize that, you know, a lot of the talk on Twitter is either, you know, agreeing with something as a whole or disagreeing with something as a whole. And they're usually good things that are passed as part of legislation and bad things that are passed as part of legislation. And so a lot of the talk from the right is that, you know, they agree with this bill because it requires people to get an ID in order to vote. But that's not what a majority of this bill deals with, and that's a problem. This bill has multiple different layers. And personally, this is a really complex issue. So I support the idea of requiring an ID to vote. You know, you bring your birth certificate to the DMV or MVC or whatever, and you get a government issued ID. However, it's not really that simple. You have to actually pay for that. And a lot of the people that can't afford it are people that typically vote Democrat. You know, people that live in some of these inner city areas. But it costs, you know, a fair amount of money to get these IDs, and people just don't have that type of money lying around. Even though it's like, you know, you might think it's cheap. I think it's cheap. But to some other people, you have to be cognizant that it might not be cheap to them. They might not be able to afford a government-issued ID. And so, first of all, and my conservative friend agrees with me on this, government-issued IDs should be free. You know, you don't have to agree with free healthcare or anything like that, but government-issued IDs should be free. If you're going to require an ID to vote, you know, then that ID should be easily accessible. I don't have a problem with requiring IDs to vote, as long as they're, you know, as long as they're free. But they're not free. That's the problem, and that's why I don't like this piece of legislation. But like I said, this law is a lot deeper than requiring an ID to vote. You know, it also calls for limiting ballot drop boxes. It makes it harder to extend polling hours if a problem arises at a polling place. And there are a lot of things with this bill that basically give the GOP-led state legislature more power in determining the winner of elections, which is a problem because they really just tried to overturn an election on the basis of voter fraud without any evidence that a judge has presided over and determined has been sufficient evidence. You know, affidavits. I mean, people can lie in affidavits, and I think a lot of people did, but they were looking for a lot of like real proof, like to overturn the results of this election, and there was none. They didn't find any. And so, if the Democrats tried to do something like this, remember, hindsight is always 2020. If the Democrats tried to do something like this, in which the Democrats got to determine basically who won and lost an election, let's say, I mean, you guys probably remember the 2016 election. There was a lot of talk about Russia's interference and that Trump wasn't actually elected, that he had help from Russia. You can read the Mueller report whether or not you agree with Russia having interference and Trump. They've determined that Russia did have interference. There still has been a determination of whether or not Trump was part of that, or he knew about it. But it was they convicted a lot of people around him because they knew. They just didn't know that. They still don't know if Trump knew or not. And so let's say that the Democrats wanted to, make the argument that Russia interfered with. Well, let's just say if New Jersey passes law, because I'm from New Jersey. Let's just say, the Jeff Van Drew race, which just happened. Jeff Van Drew is a Republican. Let's say that the Democrats wanted to make the argument that that Russia helped Jeff Van Drew win his seat over Amy Kennedy. And they could basically overturn the election results as a result of just saying that Russia interfered. That would be pretty undemocratic. And this bill is really undemocratic. And, I didn't even mention the stuff about, giving water being a misdemeanor now. But it's basically a way for Republicans to win every election after they basically just lost 3 of them, which garnered the national attention in the last 6 months. So I agree with the MLB wanting to move the game out of the basis of this law being unconstitutional, and wanting to, move themselves as an organization away from the state as a result. I mean, they're not going to get rid of the Braves. But like I said, this is a multi-sided answer. I said it was a 2-sided answer, but there are definitely multiple pieces involved in this. And so, on the basis of the economic impact, I disagree with this move. A lot of the problem is that the economic impact on moving the game away and then boycotting a lot of these companies that are from Georgia is that it hurts the very communities that people on Twitter and civil rights groups want to protect. I don't want to group those two people together. Civil rights groups are obviously a lot more important than, people on Twitter. But I personally disagree with boycotting companies like Coca-Cola and Home Depot because these companies employ a lot of people. I mean, Coca-Cola employs a lot of Georgians at their production and sales distribution centers, which are based in Georgia, and they have, I think, more in that state than any other state. And then Home Depot, who have many stores throughout the state and are headquartered there, employ probably even more people than Coca-Cola does. And so, I have a problem with boycotting companies like that, which Twitter wanted to boycott the other day when they found out about this bill, because, the economy really affects everybody, and if companies like Home Depot aren't doing well, Coca-Cola aren't doing well, then they're going to start laying people off, and it's going to cause unemployment to skyrocket, and that's a whole different story. And I don't have a problem with boycotting Delta and Chick-fil-A, though, first of all, because I couldn't care less about those companies. Delta agrees with this law, or at least their statement made it sound like they agree with this law, and Chick-fil-A is notoriously homophobic. So I understand boycotting those companies. Coca-Cola and Home Depot, though, they didn't really do anything wrong in this scenario. I don't think that they should be boycotted. And, that's part of the problem I have with cancel culture, because it's basically boycotting on steroids, and you can't boycott everything. You have to kind of pick and choose. And I think what the left should do, granted I'm part of the left, is start like cracking down on companies like Amazon and I guess Chick-fil-A, because I have been notoriously homophobic. Companies that or I should say entities, not companies. Entities that basically you dislike the most. The ones that have been the worst in people's eyes. And every day you turn on your phone and there's something else that people are boycotting, it's hard to get that prolonged attention. Let me just look at Twitter right now. Let me go to trending. Literally, as I say this, do you know what's trending number 2? Hashtag stuff we should cancel. And a lot of it's just joking. Talking during a movie, white, silver, and gray cars. Yeah, 40-hour work weeks. But, to an extent, though, cancel culture has gotten really out of hand. And, I agree with boycotting, making, holding people accountable. I like cancel culture on the basis of holding people accountable. If a company does something stupid, usually just boycotting them for a week, they'll kind of reverse whatever the hell they did. But the problem is this happens way too often, and as a result, the attention is kind of lost. And so I don't think you should be going back to the Coca-Cola and Home Depot thing and the people they employ. I don't think you should be punishing the people of the state, because, and I don't think you should be punishing especially the people that live in the close suburbs of Atlanta, because Atlanta was a heavily blue area, and you can talk about all the counties around there. A lot of the people that go to the baseball games, you would assume then as a result, are Democrats, and you're essentially punishing them. Most of them voted what I consider to be the right way in 2020 and 2021. They voted against this Republican bill, and so by punishing them, or at least, taking the game away from them, you're essentially punishing those people, and that's why I disagree with it. I think there definitely should be pressure on the state of Georgia, though, and there's going to be national legislature against this bill in the coming weeks or so, that'll pretty much reverse it. But anyway, that's going to be it for this episode. Thank you guys so much for listening and watching if you're watching us on YouTube. If you want to follow me on social media, the handle is @fairweatherfan, fan spelled PHAN. The website is fairweatherfan.weebly.com, spelled the same way with Fairweatherfan. Yeah, Sixers play the Grizzlies tonight, 7 p.m. No Embiid, no George Hill. We're going to lose, probably, because it's a back-to-back too. And you know how this team gets. I mean, without Embiid and Hill, their stamina has been terrible. And we haven't even seen them play a back-to-back yet. So, fun times. Alright, good talk. See you next time.